Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio, Sporting News Forbes, he says James Harden is the best show right now in basketball. I was at the game in Philly and saw him, and then the next night he was at the Garden, and Mitch saw him. He was better at the Garden than he was in Philly. Let's bring Mitch into the conversation, though, and get your take on how the East has changed. What does that Oladipo injury do to this Eastern Conference, Mitch?
Well, first of all, good afternoon, guys. Thanks for having me on. Basically kills the Pacers off. So they were never going to, I didn't think they were going to go deep in the playoffs. This is a team with a definite ceiling, but a really good team that has better chemistry probably than the Sixers, has better chemistry probably than Boston. They play together really well. They defend. But, I mean, if you're looking at just in terms of how they stack up, they don't have a Kawhi Leonard. They don't have a Joel Embiid or a Ben Simmons. They don't have a Kyrie Irving. They don't have a Giannis Antetokounmpo. So I think they were looking at, depending on who they were going to match up with in the first round, they might not have gotten out of the first round. You never know. But obviously, you feel terrible for Oladipo. Here's a guy who last year came out of nowhere, it seemed, and was, first-team all-defense. He was finally an all-NBA player. Let's not forget, when Kevin Pritchard, the Pacer GM guys, made that deal where he had to trade Paul George and, he got Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis, people were like, you got fleeced. And it turns out they made a hell of a trade for, a kid who played at Indiana, who they knew, who they project, they really knew about him more than anybody else. And I don't even know if they thought he'd play at that level, but he certainly, from what we saw in Orlando from in Oklahoma City, he was a revelation last year. But this year, he missed about 11 games because of his knee, and a lot of people, I was just out of Brooklyn the other night to see the red-hot Nets, and talking to scouts about Oladipo, his name came up, and there were a couple who said, you know what, there's something wrong with him because he doesn't have the same explosion or lift this year. He has been troubled by the knee, and then what happens last night is the knee gave out, and he's done, and so that basically that ruins it for Nate McMillan and his guys, so that's tough to see.
Yeah, not for the Sixers, though. I mean, I think here in Philadelphia, we look at that and understand you never want to see anybody go down, especially like that. But with the backdrop of Philadelphia being now you're clearly looking at above a couple of teams, what do you think that means for just the playoff picture itself, maybe not necessarily seeding?
Well, what day is it? January 24th, 25th? It's a little hard to talk about the playoffs now.
It's Philly, Mitch. We talk about everything in the postseason after the second game.
You guys are nuts. The deal is that I look at, and all, everybody, the thing about all these teams I look at, the four teams that are left, and I'm talking about Toronto, Boston, Philly, and Milwaukee, not in that order necessarily that I see a finish, but they all kind of have these things where you look at it and you go, this is going to catch up with them. I can go through every team and tell you that there's some things that are going to catch up. There's some one or two big things that could prevent them from getting to a finals. Now, conversely, if I want to see the glass half full, LeBron James is playing for, well, he's hurt, but he's out in L.A., so it's all kind of like anybody could finish in first. But in terms of a playoff thing, it's one of those deals where it goes back to Toronto if Kawhi Leonard is playing. And, man, I mean, I am as down on him as anybody else because this guy just doesn't play anymore, and I know he's going to be around the playoffs, so that should separate Toronto, if Lowry's healthy too, from everybody else, maybe except Boston. I kind of like those teams more than even Milwaukee, more than Philly. Giannis has never been out of the first round, so I know they got better coaching and Mike Budenholzer this year. They're a better team. They do things better. And Philadelphia, you got Attila Hun there, a.k.a. Jimmy Butler, working with the young guys, working them over. So you never know about the chemistry in Philly. And Boston's had some bad chemistry, too. I'm not telling you Boston's any great shakes right now. I think the East is pretty much up for grabs. But when it comes down to it, it's going to be hard. If Kawhi's right and his mind is set and they're all together, Toronto, and then you got a team like Boston, who last year without Kyrie and Gordon Hayward went to the Eastern Conference Finals, so they have experience. I kind of still like those two above the Philadelphia-Milwaukee too.
Do you look at the Sixers? I don't know, if you're watching them that closely, but they beat the Rockets, they beat the Spurs, and say, no Jimmy Butler, and they seem to be playing all right.
Yeah, right. Well, they're going to need Jimmy Butler. I mean, the thing about Jimmy Butler, and What was the game where Ben Simmons handed the ball to Jimmy Butler at the wrong time?
Oklahoma City.
Yeah, right, Oklahoma City. I mean, there should be like a rule that Ben Simmons, I can't say it's a rule, but in that situation, it's like why did Ben Simmons even have the ball in his hands? If he's not going to drive to the basket because he's worried about it, can't make free throws, or he can't make shots, or he's not going to shoot shots, just give the ball to Jimmy Butler well in advance like you saw against Brooklyn and Charlotte where he closed out those games. I mean, to me, that's still the great addition for Philadelphia this year is you bring in a guy in Jimmy Butler, and I'm not saying he's James Harden. I'm not saying he's Kobe Bryant. He doesn't have a great playoff track record, but in the regular season, he has won games because you give him the ball and he can create his own shot. Redick can't do that. Ben Simmons doesn't want to shoot. Embiid is not the same player in that scenario as a Jimmy Butler. So I think that's great that they have a Jimmy Butler. How it's all going to work out in the end, I don't know. But, I mean, now they're in this ridiculously – I haven't seen them play a lot lately closely, but I have looked at their schedule. And
brutal.
It's, brutal.
Yeah.
It's going to be brutal, these, 12 games or whatever. And they're doing great so far, but they got to get Jimmy Butler back. And then we'll see how they do. I mean, look, their problem is it's like when Jimmy Butler's on the floor with Embiid and Simmons, sometimes the court shrinks and they don't have enough outside shooting, and so it gets congested. And how compatible are Simmons and Embiid, and on and on and on. You worry about that. Can they be players like they were last year in terms of getting guys either in a trade or, in the buyout market like they got with Bellinelli and Ilyasova? We'll see. But they have to definitely get some other role players on that team.
Is Brett Brown able to use Ben Simmons in not necessarily a totally different way, Mitch, but adjust more to your point where if you do have a scenario, and it's not only end of game, maybe it's when things tighten up a little bit in the half court as well in the postseason, but can we see him play more of a 4 if you know that he's not going to be, if he's going to have the ball and not shoot, where you can put Butler, Embiid, Simmons, and maybe 2 shooters, knowing you're going to give some defense up on the wing, but overcoming that in Ben is good enough down low to defend the 4 at least. Is that something that's even realistic?
Well, that's a tough question for me to answer because I don't know the ins and outs that well. But, I mean, look, you got to tell me who else is on the floor. You got to tell me the matchups. You got to tell me who they're going against.
Well, you lose a lot because, unfortunately, in order to overcome the lack of shooting that you addressed, you would have to have a lineup with like J.J. Redick and maybe Landry Shamet out there,
right.
and you'd probably get cooked.
Yeah, right. I mean, look, I don't know.
You might put up $130, but you'll probably give up $150.
Well, I don't know what Brett Brown, thinks about this. We don't know the moves they're going to make. We don't know. They have to add, to me, you look at that team, and the bench is a big problem.
Yep.
That's the thing. And I don't know, I know they're looking at Terrence, I've heard they're looking at guys like Terrence Ross. Is J.R. Smith a possibility? Never say never. I mean, Cleveland's going to be sellers. I don't know if they like Alec Burks. I don't know if they like Rodney Hood. But they're going to have to get other players who can score the ball off the bench I'm talking about. And that's the big thing. I mean, and we'll see what Elton Brand and the committee down there cooks up. So never say never on Ben Simmons playing the 4, but it's a little hard right now to project because here's the bottom line for me. I don't think they feel like they can go into the playoffs with this roster as presently constituted. They have to have some upgrades.
Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM, NBA radio. James Harden. I saw him the other night. Corey Brewer and him had a nice little fun. That was fun watching those two. But you got to see him go off at the Garden. Greatest show on earth right there. Why is he the best show in the game right now? They stink. That team stinks.
Well, you know what? Look what he's playing with. I mean, he is holding the fort for Clint Capella and Chris Paul. And here's a guy, when you look at statistically what he's done over the last, 20 games, and especially over these games where the only person who compares to him really is like Wilt Chamberlain, that, to me, blows everybody else out of the water. The Warriors, we know they're great. The Warriors, we know every night they've got Durant and Curry, but they've got multiple MVPs. You look at, the Lakers, you don't even talk about LeBron anymore. You don't talk about the Lakers anymore because they lose without LeBron. So right now, James Harden, for me, and what he's done, and basically, and he has to do, he's a one-man band. He's got to do it by himself because other than Eric Gordon, who's basically his best roles as a sixth man or a seventh man, he's not playing with much of anything. And to keep that team afloat and for him to play where defenses know he's going to have the ball And how are you going to stop them? They haven't been able to stop them. I mean, it has been a phenomenal run. And let's not forget, the guy was the MVP last year, and I picked him to repeat as the MVP this year because when you play for Mike D'Antoni, guys, and you have the ball in your hands, he lets you do basically whatever you want. And we talked to Mike last night about this, and he said, yeah, there's a fine line where, there are points where should James pass the ball to other people who have maybe a better look, or should James either drive it, he's basically unstoppable, his step-back moves, I know he and Curry have to. His handle last night, just watching him, I'm sitting there going, I know everybody raves about Steph Curry, but this guy's handle is incredible. And you know he's going to get to the line 1 trillion times. So what Mike was trying to say was, the bottom line was, James can do whatever he needs to do in his mind to figure out a way to get us to win. And so far, I mean, this stretch, and he brought him out of the dead. They were nowhere, when the season first started. And then the injuries and all the turmoil they've had, the Carmelo Anthony thing not working out, to me, and the way he's putting up these numbers, like I say, if you're getting compared to Wilt Chamberlain in what you're doing, that to me that separates him from everybody else.
Mitch, just let people know in Philadelphia, the greater Philly area, all the way down to AC, how good Denver is. We don't pay attention to every single team in the NBA. And also, I guess my question is, how concerned should we be that they're going to kick the Sixers' ass Saturday?
Well, here's the thing. They've got a tremendous big man in Jokic, right, who is a phenomenal passer. He's a great offensive player. And Jamal Murray is emerging as a tremendous player. It's funny. I was talking to a coach who will remain nameless, a head coach, and we were talking about the problems in Minnesota and all. And, we know that they passed over Steph Curry twice, 1 year in the draft. Do you know that they took Chris Dunn over Jamal Murray?
Wow.
That was Tom Thibodeau. So that's coming back to haunt him. Jamal Murray is emerging as a top 5 player. I've known Mike Malone a long time. I've known him since he was a kid. His father, Brendan, was a part of that great Chuck Daly staff when the Pistons had the Bad Boys, and Mike was a kid. And I've seen Mike through the rise through the ranks. He was an assistant with Cleveland, I think, years ago with LeBron's first go-round there. He's been around. He's coached Sacramento. His big thing is, guys, you got to defend. And he's done a tremendous job in the couple of, he's been there a few years now, and they are really buying into the fact that they have to play defense. And they're great. The amazing thing is, until they fill out of first place, they hadn't been in first place. And it's, the Warriors basically overtook them, in the last week or two. They hadn't been in first place this late in the season since 1977. I mean, that's a long time. So
is that
I don't know if they're going to
English
kick.
Team there?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if they're going to do what you say they're going to do to Philly, but Brett Brown will have his guys ready, and they're going to get people's attention because they have played some tremendous ball this year. And on the nights they don't play defense, they don't buy into what Mike Malone constantly harps on them about. They've never won. All these guys are learning how to win. So, you got to remember, last year didn't make the playoffs. They lost on the last night of the regular season in overtime to Minnesota and finished 9th. So,
right.
You're the team right now in Philadelphia between Simmons and Embiid have been out of the first round. Jimmy Butler's got playoff experience. When you talk about just experience, Philadelphia's got it all over these guys in Denver. But Denver's an up-and-coming team. There's no question.
By the way, Philly plays Denver twice in this stretch. They're there, and then they're here. They play the Lakers twice, too. They're there, and then they're here. Yeah. So Philly, and then they play Toronto at home and Boston at home to close this thing out.
Killer. And I hope you guys get to see LeBron. I would expect he should be back anytime soon. But here's a guy who's missed, 14 or 15 straight games.
Take your
and
time.
No surprise, the Lakers are awful without him.
Yeah, take your time, LeBron. At least the game in L.A. Don't play. I wouldn't mind seeing LeBron up close again in Philly. He's Mitch Lawrence, SiriusXM NBA Radio, talking hoops as the big change in the East. Oladipo out. It was a 5-team race. It now looks like a 4-team race. Harden, so much. The league is doing really well. A lot of great storylines and more with Mitch throughout the season. Thanks, pal.
Hey, guys,
Thanks,
enjoy
Mitch.
it. Thanks you. See you.
Mitch _Lawrence on Twitter.